Now, for the past 30 minutes, Lana and Carl have expressed why this is not a good time to fight and why we can't win. And I'm hoping with my presentation, I'll be able to convince you otherwise, and why it's important for us to continually build up our organization and empower the labor movement as a whole. My presentation will take place with two major considerations. One will be the technical and the other will be the big picture. So just starting with the technical, I'll go through some of the contentions we have with what's being proposed in this contract extension, starting with wages. So the 2% and the lump sum is the big golden carrot that Canada Post is hoping to distract you with, and so you're not noticing all the other things that aren't being improved or are being left aside. Really, 2% on its own may not seem that bad, especially when compared to with maybe some of the other bargaining, some of the other unions that have gone through bargaining over the past couple of years. But when taken into the context of the last 2 decades of our sum negotiations, our purchasing power is considerably lower now than it was, say, 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. Just reflecting for myself as an employee of this company for 17 years almost, my dollar does not go as far in paying my rent, for people paying their mortgage, car payments, gas, groceries, etc. So 2% in the context of the Bank of Canada is announcing a 3.7% inflation next year, over the next year. So that basically means we're going to be losing purchasing power of 1.5%. Now, this is especially hard to take when postal workers help deliver Canada through a pandemic, where most other workers were able to stay home at certain points or collect the CERB. Our members were out there every day unless they were sick or isolating to make sure that Canadians could get through this nightmare. So we didn't get hero pay. We didn't get a emergency relief top up. We didn't get special considerations or a subsidy from the government. So if anything, we have more leverage now than if we wait 2 years from now to assert that we did our part in the pandemic. Now it's time that we're rewarded for it. Moving on to job security. I was rather confused that this was included as a reason to vote yes. Even outside of a contract extension proposal, it's very much status quo that our job security clause is basically just renewed every time. And the reason for this is simple. It's because Canada Post has a hard time recruiting and keeping new hires. Anyone who's done this job recently in the depots or in the plant knows that we have a hard time keeping our trainees. Part of this is because of the sharp learning curve of the job. The other part of it is that we don't have a good staffing procedures. Some people are just waiting at home for shifts, and Canada Post likes to do that. So, I mean, really, it's, if anything, Canada Post wants to incentivize people to work at Canada Post. So part of that would actually be an increased wage. So it's like if Canada Post is looking at the long run and they want to quit dumping money on just bleeding out their trainees, we only keep 25% of our new trainees within a year. So that's a lot of money. I think it's around $5,000 into training each new member that many of them they don't keep. For the 2-bundle model, this is something that's been mired in the grievance system for close to a decade now. So Canada Post, in my opinion, is just fully willing to stall this out and to let the arbitrator decide. And the reason they're going to be comfortable doing that is because the arbitration system is not designed to give workers satisfaction or to empower workers. It's designed to demoralize you. So if you have an issue like, oh, we have a health and safety concern about 2-bundle, instead of dealing with it immediately on the work floor and confronting the boss through organizing, they want you to just wait for a grievance model, for the grievance to take care of it. And now look where we are. So Canada Post, they're probably going to know what the arbitrator's decision is before the arbitrator issues it. I don't have any faith in that model at all to keep that confidential, and it's not going to be favorable for us once it comes out. Moving on to SSD, we resumed our our parking lot meetings, and this was the biggest point of concern for our letter carrier depots. So separate sortation from delivery is the end of our jobs as letter carriers as we know it. I'm concerned that by voting in this MOA to enshrine this policy, basically giving Canada Post permission to enact it with the opportunity to consult, and that's what we're dealing with here. Canada Post has the choice after they consult with us what they want to do, whether they do SSD or whether they do this multi-wave system forever. So make no mistake, Canada Post is the one that makes the final decision here. And what Calgary achieved, although it was a wonderful stopgap, it did not, I would not consider it a victory, and it is not a permanent solution. It is just buying time until Canada Post decides to implement SSD with a better plan. Now, in my opinion, the only acceptable position for the union regarding SSD is to outright reject it and to fight to roll it back where it exists. And I'll circle back to that point under the big picture. Now, moving on to Group 1, Brother Gerard alluded to that we already did have language in the collective agreement for being able to determine our the staffing levels for Group 1. The problem that we see with collecting any information from Canada Post is that they have no problem hiding and manipulating information. So I think this is a step in the right direction, but I don't think this is good enough on its own to justify the extension. I think this language needs to have more teeth and enforcement. So when Canada Post does deliberately give misinformation or hides misinformation and then says, oh, you don't like it, grieve it. And then we have to wait however long until we get satisfaction there. Meanwhile, they've had their say with staffing. I just don't think this is strong enough language. But the biggest issue from a technical perspective that I want us to really look into is this talk of financial services. It's very confusing to me why this is included in this recommendation, because Canada Post has announced they will be implementing this. They're implementing it regardless of what we decide here. Whether we vote yes, Canada Post is doing it. Whether we vote no, Canada Post is still doing it. But as far as like the broader context as to why postal banking is important, let's dig into that a little bit. No union leadership in CUPW disagrees with the importance of postal banking. I'm not going to sit here and say postal banking isn't something that would be tremendous for us. The concern is we want to do it the right way. What is being proposed to us is that Canada Post is allowing TD Bank, one of the big banks in Canada that has a monopoly in the finance sector, to move into rural and small locations, places that these big banks have abandoned because they weren't profitable enough. So now Canada Post is rolling out the red carpet for them. They're giving these banks the brick and mortar infrastructure and basically subsidizing these parasites, let's call them what they are, they're parasites, to come back into these locations. And you better believe that these people aren't coming back in unless it's a sweet deal for them. And of course, the details of the revenue sharing haven't been disclosed, so we don't know how much Canada Post is actually getting. So it's a little bit of a blind bet. So, and in my mind, if you let the big banks in without concrete language as to when they have to leave and when we take over, then it makes it actually harder for us to institute a public postal bank. So what you end up having instead of a public postal bank staffed by CUPW members is a public-private partnership that entrenches TD in our operations. And that's, to me, that's unacceptable. It makes our job a lot harder to get a public postal bank. A public postal bank is going to be the thing that will basically save our jobs in the long run. Lana and Carl touched on the problem of the deficit. That could very well be a concern. But we also have to look at this in the broader societal context of, as long as labor and workers decide to keep towing the government line as far as we have to be the ones to bear the responsibility of economic downturn, whereas the rich and big business aren't paying their share in taxes. The corporate tax rate now is like below 30%. After World War II, it was somewhere between 70 and 80%. So the scales have shifted. And guess what? It's not going to be the government that tilts them back. It's going to be labor once they rediscover their power to assert it. Now, a big way for us to do that, to deal with the deficit Canada Post and to tilt the scales back, is to make public postal banking the marquee item for which we're willing to go on strike for and we're willing to fight for it, because it not only benefits us by creating jobs and revenue, but it benefits all of Canadian society by offering a powerful public option to what has been previously dominated by private financial interests. And with that, I'll go into the big picture considerations. In her video, Sister Simpson said that what you're voting on tonight is just the technicalities and not the process, and I just want to respectfully disagree with the sister on that. The union's strength, and what we always like to say in our local, is the membership is always right. Not because the membership necessarily always makes the correct decision, but because whatever the membership decides is where you have the most leverage and the most power. So if the membership decides, you know what, we're all getting together, we're going to defy back to work legislation, that is the correct response, because that is where our power lies. If our membership says, you know what, we're never going to win. Let's just give up. Let's roll over now. The membership's correct because you can't do anything without the leverage of the membership. So same thing with negotiations. I felt it was improper. I don't think it was necessarily unconstitutional, but I felt it was improper that when Canada Post approached our National Executive Board, the National Executive Board didn't just stop right there and maybe reach out to the locals and say, hey, what's the mood on the work floors? What do you think about doing this? Should we proceed? But they actually had a back and forth, which is technically negotiations. No union leadership should have any negotiations with the employer unless they have the permission of the members and the marching orders as to what they're negotiating about. I think it was done with the best of intentions, but I still think it unwittingly undermined what makes a union strong. And one of the reasons that CUPW is widely regarded in the labor movement as one of the more progressive unions is because we've always been deeply committed to our membership making the decisions every step of the way. And that means building negotiation demands which are passed at regional conference. The better way to have approached this would have been that the NEB could have given Canada Post proposal alongside the program of demands as generated by the members. That would have been a way where you could honor both the secondary consideration from Canada Post as well as what the members have taken the time to generate. But that isn't what happened, and so a no vote would go a long way in telling National, it's like, yeah, you know what, maybe you tried your best with the best of intentions, but that wasn't appropriate, and you should always stick to the proper process. As far as this argument about this is a no concessions contract, again, this argument only holds up if you do not take into account the past two decades of us losing. So if we've just been losing ground, and now we're at a place where we're just not bleeding as badly, can you say that this is a gain? Or is it, like, in my mind, it's unacceptable. We have to get back to a place where everyone is paid the same wage for the same work. We have to get back to a place where we have to gain a place where RSMCs are treated equally to letter carriers. It doesn't make sense to me to champion this as a gain. We are so far behind, even when I started 17 years ago, that to say that it's not the good time to fight, there's never a perfect time to fight. There's never a perfect time. When CUPW fought for maternity leave or fought for the rights of sisters to be employed full-time in the post office, the public hated it, the government hated it, and the company hated it. But we organized and we fought anyway, and we won. And not only our union is better for it, but all of Canadian society is better for it. So if we take the attitude of just, we're not going to prepare, we don't have a plan, we need to bide our time, that's on us for not preparing properly, which moves into the point that Brother Gerard claimed that the union is not weak. And respectfully, and I say this as someone that's given my life to trying to improve this union, the union is weak. And that is evidenced from the fact that the last time we had an extension vote like this, we had barely over 20% of people coming out to vote. The voting numbers for Edmonton, although slightly better than last time, aren't as high as they should be. The fact that I've been in touch with locals throughout the country, many locals did not have general membership meetings throughout the entire pandemic. A lot of locals have trouble making quorum. It's like that is not indicative of a strong organization. And if you have locals suffering like that, it's up to our national leadership to go in there and to help those locals get to a place where there is robust education happening, where their members are coming out to meetings, and so we can build. Because when it comes to times like this, we're very hamstrung, right? The company sees these low voter turnouts, and they see this lack of engagement, and they see that as permission to take further advantage of our members. So the union is weak, but thankfully there is a lot to do that we can improve it. And that also another big picture consideration. There's a lot of talk about being strategic, and I'm going to say, like Brother Gerard, I'm super impressed with his work as a grievance officer. He's one of the sharpest of the bunch I've seen up in that position, and he has excellent analysis when it comes to the proceduralism aspect of unionisms, and I will always value his perspectives when it comes to that. But I would also encourage our union to equally consider the organizing perspective. If we look at our union as a bird, and one wing is the proceduralism, that we do the grievances, the arbitrations, the consultation, that sort of work, the technical work, the other wing needs to be organizing. And what's happened in this union is you have 95% of this proceduralism and then maybe 5% of this organizing at the national level. And as a result, the bird doesn't fly true, and it's not really going anywhere at all. And we just keep kind of circling around the same problems over and over and over again. Building Power to Win campaign that was introduced by National a little bit too late, but better late than never, is an excellent example of the work we need to be doing. It's just too bad that that campaign mysteriously disappeared the moment the talks started happening between Canada Post and the National Executive Board. So I'm not going to begrudge that, but I will say, regardless what happens with this vote, the National Union absolutely needs to invest further into programs like that, not just doing outreach to members, but to be building up capacity on the workforce so that members know how to organize. Organizing is just like any other skill. People don't understand it spontaneously. It needs to be deliberately taught and supported. And if that is not happening at every local level in this country, it is the responsibility of the national leadership to go into those locals to encourage and support and nurture that perspective. So just to close out, if you're voting no to this contract extension proposal, that means we're going back to traditional negotiations. And going back to traditional negotiations doesn't mean we lose everything that's being proposed right now. It means that what's being proposed right now becomes part of the considerations as to what we could negotiate for and fight for. But other things that we can negotiate for, if we vote down this proposal, will be demands that we've already passed at the regional conference. And some of those demands include wages that scale with inflation, eliminating the two-tier wage system, improve benefits, that the benefits are also scaling with our wages in the same way. They've been neglected for so long, and in many ways they're behind. We want to stop and reverse SSD. It's not acceptable to just have these half measures and just trust that consultations will bail us out somehow. They need to be stopped, because once that system is implemented, much like Modern Post was implemented, and we didn't have a plan for fighting that either, good luck turning it back. And then it's just something that we get beaten down and demoralized about, and we accept, we go about our jobs, and then 10 years later we're extending another garbage contract and wondering how we got here. But lastly, and most importantly, one of the demands that we should be fighting for is a public postal bank staffed by CUPW members. We want concrete language as to, sure, bring in consultants, financial advisors, maybe even some of the banks, but it needs to be on a specific timeline, 2 or 3 years to help set things up, and then they're exiting so that we could begin those operations. And to be clear, if the Canada Post is about making money and the government is about expanding public services, which they won't be unless we force them, let's be honest, Public Postal Bank is the best way to do that, and it's an excellent wedge issue to bring forward to the public to garner support. So to close, by all means, if you think that what is being proposed by the national executive is acceptable, you think that this you're content with your job as it is, it doesn't seem that bad, and you are content with the direction of the national union, you think that they've done a good job planning and charting our course moving forward, by all means vote yes. But some things to consider. If you don't think that your dignity as a worker can be bought by this paltry lump sum and all these empty words, you're gonna need to vote no. Voting no is also an excellent way to tell National that we need to change course. We need to really focus on organizing our members, because these like Brother Gerard said it himself, we challenged the back to work legislation from the Harper regime. The courts came out in favor of us. What did that do for our situation? Nothing. We got legislated back again. And guess what? When we challenge it in court and the courts side on our side, it's not going to change another government legislating us back to work. So all roads point to this union getting serious about actually being a union and actually empowering its members. So vote no to tell National to change its direction, and that how they approached this contract extension was not acceptable, and vote no to go back to traditional negotiations. If we don't fight, we don't have a chance of winning at all. And my concern is that if we take this extension, what's stopping Canada Post from just offering further extensions? Or what's stopping our union leadership from not honoring the ratification process and just keep going back to the well of let's extend this by 2 more years? I don't want the next 15 years of my career to just be a steady decline and a steady defeat and my job continually getting worse. The only way we're going to turn this around starts tonight by all of you voting no.